know.
First of all,
you assume everything's going to change.
Chris,
1 million people are not going to stay outside your window for 4 years. They're not going to be out the window. They may come once.
Well, you are assuming, and this is the difference between our views, you are assuming, you know, that the American people are not going to be engaged in the political process. I think by definition.
No, I'm watching the turnout figures this year, and they're not going up.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Not on the Democratic side.
Look, first of all, let's jump into that. Barack Obama in 2008 ran, in my view, one of the great campaigns in the history of the United States of America. You and nobody else has ever heard me say that, you know, we're going to run a better campaign than he did. It was a brilliant campaign. But this is what I will tell you, Chris. When I started this campaign, I was at 3% in the polls. In the last 10 days, there have been 4 national polls that I've seen. 3 of them had me in the lead, 1, 2 points down. We have come a long, long way. In terms of voter turnout, no. The voter turnout was not what Obama did in 2008. And by the way, though, in that election, to talk about little politics, you had John Edwards, you had other candidates in there bringing in votes. The voter turnout actually in Iowa was strong, in New Hampshire very strong, in Nevada not strong, which is why we lost. So our job is, in fact, to make sure that these young people come out, working class people come out to vote.
Is everybody here going to vote? Yeah! Thank you. We'll be right back with some questions from the audience right here at the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics. The Hardball College Tour with Senator Bernie Sanders continues after this. Welcome back to the Hardball College Tour. By the way, look at that picture. That's Chamberlain House, one of the dorms here at the University of Chicago where Senator Bernie Sanders lived when he was a student here. We'll have more on his career here and the excitement of those days that involved a lot of activities by this guy here. Anyway, we want to get our first question in from the students. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Dania Lagos. Thank you very much, Senator Sanders, for all you're doing. Earlier in the campaign, you notably decided not to focus on Hillary's emails. Now, as the campaign has increased in intensity, do you believe it's time to bring up the millions of dollars that the Clinton Foundation received from foreign governments when she was Secretary of State?
Look, what I have tried to do as somebody who has never run a negative campaign, a negative ad in my entire life, is to try to focus on the issues that I think are impacting the American people. You raise an important issue. I understand that. And I have talked about the fact that Hillary Clinton has received many millions of dollars from Wall Street for her campaign and for her super PAC. She's received very large speakers' fees from Goldman Sachs. I think those are important issues. And by the way, I agree with the New York Times editorial. I don't know if anyone saw it today, where they urged Secretary Clinton to release the transcripts of the speeches that she gave behind closed doors to Wall Street. So those are issues that I am going to focus on. But right now, my focus is to contrast my views on how we can improve life for the middle class and working families of this country. But thanks very much for that question.
Go ahead.
Hi, Senator Sanders. Welcome back. My name is Igala Obi. Your opponent's new line is that she is the one who can break down barriers that all people face. However, the reality is that many of the barriers in place, especially for low-income individuals and people of color, were created by the policies put in place during the Clinton administration. Given this reality, do you feel that this claim of breaking down barriers is at least a little ironic, and how are you in a better position to do so?
Thank you very much. Very good question. And I think you make a good point. As I mentioned the other day, we had a press conference on this. In 1996, the Clinton administration and then First Lady Clinton was very active in so-called welfare reform. You familiar with what that was? And welfare reform really picked up on the Republican agenda. And it said that one of the basic problems in America is that poor people, and by the way, African Americans, were ripping off the welfare system. Well, everybody believes in welfare reform if it means helping people get the education, the child care, and the jobs they need to improve their lives. That's not what that bill did. That bill ended up increasing very significantly extreme poverty in America. It caused a lot of suffering for some of the poorest and most vulnerable people in this country. So I think your point is exactly correct. And I think that's an issue we will be talking about a whole lot. Thank you.
Go ahead next. This is fast.
Senator Sanders, thank you for being here. My name is Patrick Quinn. My question is, the recent firing of Chicago Police Superintendent McCarthy highlights the fact that even intended reformers can fail in the face of institutional power. As president, how would you reform our criminal justice system?
Great question, and it's an issue that is very, very high on my agenda. We have a broken criminal justice system. Everybody in this room and everybody in this country should be ashamed that we have more people in jail than any other country on earth, 2.2 million people, more than China, largely African American and Latino. So let me tell you some of the things that I would do. First of all, what we do is try to prevent people from getting into the criminal justice. What is justice system? What does it mean? Today, if you are an African American kid between 17 and 20 and you graduated high school, you didn't go to college, do you know what your unemployment rate is, unemployment and underemployment rate is? It is 51%. 51%. So my view is we will invest in jobs and education for those kids rather than jails and incarceration. Second of all, we have got to create, and the federal government can play an important role dealing with local municipalities, creating a model program for police departments. For example, lethal force should be the last resort, not the first resort. Second of all, if an individual is killed by a police officer or dies in police custody, that should automatically trigger a Department of Justice investigation. Thirdly, we want to make police departments look like the communities they serve in terms of their diversity. Fourthly, we want to demilitarize police departments. Fifthly, we want to take a hard look at the so-called war on drugs. Millions of people in this country have police records, and disproportionately African American, by the way, because of possession of marijuana. I find it interesting in criminal justice that people on Wall Street whose illegal behavior destroyed our economy, they don't get a police record. Some kid in Chicago gets picked up with marijuana, he or she gets a police record. That's not right.
Hi, Senator Sanders. My name is Sid Jain. Thank you for being here, first of all. So my question is, I was hoping you could elaborate more on the Apple privacy debate and what your broader plans are once elected to tackle the issue of government surveillance.
That's a huge issue, and it's a very, very important issue. You're looking at a guy who voted against the USA Patriot Act. That was a hard vote. You know, sometimes it becomes easier. This is after 9/11. It wasn't such an easy vote. And my concern then and my concern now is that the NSA and the government, you know, they're keeping records on all of your phone calls, or many of your phone calls. They have the ability and occasionally use it to go into the websites you visit and check out your emails. But you know what? It is not just the government. It is corporate America as well, who knows a whole lot about your purchasing habits, maybe your banking records, maybe your medical records as well. So the bottom line here, Chris...
Explain how they use that.
Well, I don't know. Well, if I know the products that you buy, then I know how to advertise and get to you. But the bottom line here is there has been a revolution in technology in the last 20 years. Public policy has in no way kept pace with that transformation of our society. Now, to answer your question, this is a tough issue. On one hand, do we want to keep tabs on ISIS recruiting efforts? Yeah, you're damn right we do. On the other hand, do we want to open the door so that the federal government now knows much too much about you, more than they should? How you achieve that balance is not easy. That's the issue that we have got to answer.
Where are you on Snowden?
You know, I think Snowden broke the law. That's true. And I think he deserves his day in court to make his case. On the other hand, there would not be a whole lot of the discussion that we're hearing today if Snowden did not come forward and tell us what the NSA was doing.
So you wouldn't throw the book at him?
No, I would not throw the book at him.
Okay, we're going to come right back. We're going to talk about the senator, what he was like when he was the age of you guys here at this school. There's some amazing stories I want him to talk about. Much more from Senator Sanders when we get back. You're watching the Hardball College Tour, live from the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics. impression. Red Dirt Brass Band. They're all students at the University of Chicago. Those guys are heading to New Orleans, as you can tell. Anyway, it's great having them. We're back with a Hardball College Tour, live from the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics. Let me get to some of these things about you, because we haven't had a chance to talk about you.
I'd rather talk about you.
No, we don't want to fight anymore. I can't fight. I've done my fighting. Let me ask you about the 60s. And I always try to, I'm only a few years behind you, and I always tell people, my kids love to talk about, and my grandkids, if I've lived long enough, they love the 60s. What did it feel like? What was the zeitgeist like in the 60s here, when you were here?
Well, you know, to be honest with you, and I don't say that just because I'm on TV, I was not much into drugs. My hair was a little bit long, not that long.
We've got pictures.
Yeah.
We're showing them.
For me, coming here to the University of Chicago, I think in 61 or 2, what was mind-blowing for me was beginning to get involved with a whole lot of people who were very different from the people that I grew up with in Brooklyn. And I became involved in the civil rights movement.
Right.
I think one of the first jobs that I ever had here in Chicago was with what was called the Packing House Workers of America. I mean, this used to be a major...
Mostly African Americans.
Often African Americans, right? Yeah, that's right. And, you know, that's all gone now. But I learned about the trade union movement here. I learned about the civil rights movement. I learned about foreign policy and the peace movement as well.
What was it like to get involved in it to the extent you'd be arrested?
Here's what it was. The hard work and the dangerous work was being done in the South. It's where people were getting killed and their heads...
Cheney and Goodman.
Exactly. And their heads bashed off or getting killed. This is what we did here. We said, we are going to provide, you know, I didn't have any money, but, you know, we're going to provide some, you know, financial support for our friends in the South. But we got to look at what's going on here in Chicago as well. And I want to say this to the young people here at the University of Chicago. Back in the early 1960s, the University of Chicago, as you know, owns a lot of property, owns a lot of apartments. In those days, many of those apartments were segregated. They were segregated. And what we did, Chris, is we would send a black couple, husband and wife, to an apartment. And they'd say, do you have any apartments available? And the guy, they would say, well, no, we're sorry, we don't. An hour later, we'd send the white couple. They say, oh, what would you like to see? We have all kinds of apartments available. And then we got focused on, so the demand was that the University of Chicago end the segregated housing that it owned. Then I got involved in a broader issue. At that point, the schools in the city of Chicago were pretty segregated, and I got involved in that, and that's where I got arrested.
Let's talk about where you've done some recent things. Let's take a look at where you stood up against a guy who showed bigotry about gay people. Let's watch this from the Senate floor.
Is there any shocking doubt? The same people that would vote to cut defense $177 billion, the same ones that would put homos in the military, the same ones that would not fund BRAC, the same ones that would not clear up. No, I will not. Sit down, you socialist.
My ears may have been playing a trick on me, but I thought I heard the gentleman a moment ago say something, quote unquote, about homos in the military. Was I right in hearing that expression?
Absolutely. Putting homosexuals in the military.
You said something about homos in the military. Was the gentleman referring to the many thousands and
You know who that was? That was Duke Cunningham.
He's busy now, isn't he?
Yes. I don't know if he's still in jail or not, but he... Yes, he was sent to jail for bribery.
But have you sent him any cards or anything?
No, I have not. And you know, here is an example of somebody on the floor of the House making grossly homophobic statements, and it had to be dealt with, and I dealt with them.
Let's talk about your ideology, because I've never quite figured it out. And back here when you were a student, you were not only involved in civil rights, you joined a group called the Young People's Socialist League. A lot of people grew up, you know, I'm not that younger than you, a few years, a couple. Socialism was a hard thing to grab onto. How did you grab onto? How did you feel comfortable enough to get involved? Because a lot of kids here, how many people here are comfortable calling themselves socialist? Well, the hand was enough, but that's right. How many again? Let me see that signal. It's some. It's not a huge number. It's I'd say
more over there, I think.
Okay. Well, but maybe if it was back then, it would have been harder to even get your hand up.
Look, what it was to me to trying to connect the dots, to try to understand what money and power was about, the impact it had on society, why it was that we had so much, and it's worse today than we had then, income and wealth inequality. But Chris, when I talk about...
It's worse now, right?
Yes, it is worse now. But when I talk about democratic socialism, what I talk about today is looking at countries around the world who have had labor governments and social democratic governments who have brought health care to all of their people as a right, who have made public colleges and universities tuition free, who have managed to make sure that when elderly people retire, they can live in dignity, who have much higher voter turnouts than we do, a more vibrant democracy. That's kind of what I'm talking about.
Do we have to make some other changes? We spend all our money defending the world with our military, right? We're paying national debt through the roof. It seems, you know the budget. So much of it doesn't go to helping people today. It goes to either paying off debt or paying for a military. There's a World War II, Cold War budget.
Right.
You know, Sweden doesn't have that problem.
Well, we're not Sweden, and
I'm in a smaller socialist
That's
countries.
right.
They don't have the burden we have.
Well, but they don't have the resources that we have as well. You know, they don't have the collective wealth that we have as well. Look, the bottom line is we need a strong military. Do I think it is bloated? Absolutely. Do you know how many administrators we have in the military? It's not just the men and women who are in uniform. We have, I think, 1.5 people to administer every man and woman who is in uniform. Right. You have huge cost overruns in the military. You got a lot of fraud that goes on there. You can't, the U.S. Department of Defense cannot sustain an independent audit, one of the few agencies of government. But also, I think you have to address the level of income and wealth inequality and the transfer of trillions of dollars from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%.
We're going to go back to the big picture when we come back. I think you're going to like this segment. More questions from the audience when we come back at the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics. Back to Senator Bernie Sanders. We're back with Senator Bernie Sanders on the Hardball College Tour. I have one question fell off my lip in our tussle there in the second block. Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
What's your reaction to the whole movement? It's a real movement.
It's a real movement, and these people are raising an enormously important issue that I think the white community is not familiar with. African Americans worry about when they let their kids out on the streets. They worry when they get in their car. African Americans are 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana than whites, despite the fact that both groups smoke at about the same. Their sentences are longer when they are put in jail. And I think the Black Lives Matter have raised this issue, and that tells me, and what I believe very strongly, is we need major, major criminal justice and police reform in this country.
What do you think when you see a picture of a police officer shooting a guy as he's running away, or you see a big, heavy-set guy being choked to death right on camera?
Well, that's Eric Garner, who you're talking about. His daughter is very active in our campaign. It is indefensible. It is horrible. And I think the American people, and it's not just the African American community, are sick and tired of this. And the bottom line here is we need radical reforms in our police departments. And, you know, I was a mayor. I work with cops all of the time. Most of them are working hard, doing a good job. But when a police officer breaks the law, like any other public official, that officer must be held accountable.
Let's get a question in.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. My name is Chelsea Fine. We've talked a little bit about your background here at the University of Chicago, but one thing that you haven't discussed as much on the campaign trail is the fact that you're Jewish. As a Jewish student, I would like to know, what is your relationship with your faith, and what would it mean to become the first Jewish president?
We have about a minute.
Okay, obviously being Jewish is very, very important to me. I'm very proud of my heritage. And what comes to my mind so strongly is a kid growing up in Brooklyn and seeing people with numbers on their wrists. You probably have not seen that, but those were the people who came out of the concentration camps. And knowing that my good part of my father's family was killed by the Nazis. And that lesson that I learned as a very young person is politics is serious business. And when you have a lunatic like Hitler gaining power, 50 million people died in World War II. So I am very proud to be Jewish, and I'm proud of my heritage.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Senator Bernie Sanders. And thank you all at the University of Chicago for having us here at the Institute of Politics. Coming up at 11, join me for a live post-game analysis coverage of tonight's Republican debate. We're down in Houston tonight. Right now it's time for the Rachel Maddow Show.
That was great. That was the Hardball College Tour Town Hall, complete with a brass band on the set. Chris Mathews was Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders, live from the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics. This is a live shot right now with that event having just wrapped up. I'm Rachel Maddow at MSNBC headquarters back in New York. We do not have a brass band, but that was a remarkable event. There's a lot going on, obviously, in news and in politics tonight. On the political side, Nevada Republican Governor Brian Sandoval, of course, has taken his name out of contention today as a potential Supreme Court nominee. That's after the White House floated his name as a potential pick for the court. A whole new raft of public polling has come out on the Republican side of the presidential race.